Welcome to Grandma Magic, a podcast from the Grandmother Collective. We are a nonprofit organization that supports and advocates for a world where a grandmother's power is seen, cultivated, and activated for positive change. The Grandma Magic podcast is an opportunity to learn more about the unique roles that grandmothers, aunties, and other older women around the world play in advancing positive social development by talking to and learning from grandmother changemakers. We hope this series inspires you, brings you joy, and helps you recognize the enduring magic and wisdom that comes from grandmothers everywhere. I'm Lindsay Farrell, and I'm your host. Today, we're excited to introduce two guests joining us to represent one of our newest member organizations at the Grandmother Collective, Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights, GRR. Elayne Richard is the education coordinator for Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights, where she motivates young people, grandmothers, and others to use their voices for social justice. Her activism spans over 50 years, beginning in the 1970s when she attended the National Women's Conference in Houston, worked in an abortion clinic, participated in anti-war demonstrations, and served as a children's case manager. Elayne has lived in Fairfield, Maine for 37 years and is a proud mother and grandmother. Sarah Thompson is a retired school librarian from Fayetteville, Arkansas, and she's dedicated her post-retirement years to ensuring continued access to abortion. She served on the board of both GRR and Planned Parenthood Voters of Arkansas, has lobbied for reproductive rights at the Arkansas State Capitol, and is active with the Arkansas Coalition for Reproductive Justice. Sarah enjoys family time and working on her genealogy project through Ancestry. Together, Elayne and Sarah bring decades of experience and unwavering commitment to reproductive rights and social justice advocacy. And I am very excited you're here. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as I have been doing this entire season, because grandmothers hold up the world and hold up our culture and make sure that we know who we are and who we're rooted with and how we belong, I ask this question of everyone, and the answers have been all over the place. But what is a tradition or ritual that you want to make sure that you pass down to the generations after you, and why? Either of you could start. I think Elayne wants to.
I'll start because that's what I usually do. So I have like two traditions, but they're connected. So I'm going to tell you how they're connected. And I have to say that this goes back to when I was little and the very special times I had with my grandma, especially after we moved. And we didn't always have dedicated times. And I wanted to make sure that my grandkids had a dedicated time to spend with their grandma. So we created a birthday with grandma day. And what we do is that on their birthday, or now as close to it because they have moved so far away, that we get together and we do what's ever really special or that they want to do. And the whole idea is to spend that time just us. And we try now to do it when they come back to visit, because then we have traditions like where we go to eat and where we go to do whatever we're going to do. And I think we've been doing this since they were each 2. And I really didn't realize how important it was until one day. I mean, and they're now almost 17 and 14. So we've been doing this for a long time. We take pictures, I make a book about it, and then here we go. But one time some friends asked, we were all eating dinner together, and they said, well, what do you do that's really special? And my grandson said, I have birthdays with grandma. And I didn't realize how important that time alone is and how special that is. So that I hope we can continue to pass down. And by making little picture books of it to give to them when they get older, they'll have that to remember. And also it's like a timeline history of what do you look like? What do I look like? How we're all growing, how we're all aging. And the other thing that's connected to it is I have a big sign in my kitchen that they remember and that I pass around about eating dessert first, because I learned how to really bake from my grandma and my mom, but mostly from my grandma. And I'm passing that along to both grandkids. One's a boy, one's a girl, but really passing that along. And you do these things and you talk about your family, about what happened when you did it and when you were little. And I think that's a really important thing that grandmas do. And holding that kind of culture and tradition going forward. I think what's important about that is that it gives you a sense of where you came from and your history. And it gives you looking forward to like what you're going to do and what that holds and the impact that that has on belonging. It gives you that sense of belonging because you know that that tradition keeps following and moving forward. So those are the two kind of traditions I like to pass down, and they're fun. I mean, we just have a good time.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's beautiful. What about you, Sarah?
Well, full disclosure, I'm not actually a grandmother, but I do have five great nieces and nephews. And so I get a lot of good vicarious grandparenting through them. And they range in age from 8 to almost 21. And they, of course, do not live in Arkansas. And so I don't see them as frequently as I would like to, but we do get together and we have a lot of fun. And one of the things that I want to pass on to them, and I think that is important for every family, is family history and understanding and knowing about your ancestors. And the reason that that's important to me is because my parents were both great storytellers. I was kind of one of those oops, surprise babies in the early 50s, and my dad was 40 and my mother was 36, which in the early 50s, that was late parenting. And so I've always thought it was really kind of neat to have had older parents because they talked to me about their childhoods and they talked to me about what it was like during the Depression or just historical things that they remembered that if I had had parents who were a generation younger, I would not have had those connections to things. And my dad was really into family history, but he'd never done any actual research. So one of the things that I decided when I retired was that one of my goals was going to be to do my family history. And so I've been involved with the research aspect of that for over 10 years. And so what I do with my great nieces and nephews is occasionally on birthdays or Christmas cards or things like that, I make family tree charts that have the names and birth dates and where they lived of generations, 4 or 5 generations back on both sides of the families. And I send those to them. And the older they get, the more interested they become. And I feel like the genealogy work that I'm doing and sharing with them is hopefully going to instill in them some interest in learning about your ancestors because I think it's fascinating. And my parents both told me so much about our family history that I hope to pass that on to them. And then I also have a house full of antique furniture that belonged to my great grandparents. And one of these days, this too will all belong to them.
Sarah, I have the coolest looking rolling pin that was my grandmother's. So when my granddaughter and I do things together, we use it and I'll tell her stories about what I remember when I was even younger than she was using that. So it's that history.
Yeah. Maybe one day I will take all of these ideas and compile them because every single person has something different that they do. And it's so much proof to me that grandmothers play this role. And until you like are told, think about your grandmother, we don't put it as high on the list of important things that are actually really important to who we are as humans.
Don't you wish you could still have conversations with those people? I would just love to have conversations with both of my grandmothers.
Yeah, especially as I get older. I'm their age now, and it would be like really cool to sit down and say, "So, grandma, this is what's going on." And my grandmother actually, she did some marches with the National Organization of Women, and she didn't really march per se, but she would go to these rallies And they would have a chair for her to sit down so she could sit down. I mean, I would love to be able to be talking to her now.
Yeah. I talk about grandmas all day, and every day I still have a new memory. And I was watching the documentary on the West, and I come from Arizona and I have a lot of family in Colorado. And I was watching the West and starting to dream about, like, I know I have this really crazy, rebellious great grandmother. Like, she used to run away to gamble in the mountains and stuff like that, right? Can you imagine if I had real stories? Like, oh, it's a real tragedy. So, what you're doing to pass down the family history and who you are, and that's so exactly the thing that we really think is valuable. Okay, now speaking of grandmothers being rebellious and activists, why don't you share a little bit? I don't know, one of you could share a little bit about Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights and kind of what's the origin story.
So in 2013, there were a group of older women who were friends. They lived in the coastal area of Maine, and they got together because they were really concerned about the path that reproductive health, reproductive rights were going in the country. And they felt like they had a history that when they were younger, their younger selves, they were active and they were social activists and they wanted to be able to do something about it. So they got together, first really starting talking about it, finding stories that they could share, pre-Roe kind of stories. And they felt that as grandmothers and elders, they were like the perfect people to go to a college and maybe give a chat about it, because reproductive rights or reproductive health care really, they had no skin in that game. They were way past that. So it was kind of cool to see people that looked like us up there talking about birth control, reproductive rights, choice at that time, and abortions. So what happened was I met up with them in 2017. And by that time, the political landscape was a little bit different than when they started. And they asked me to become the education coordinator. So, like organizing, going into schools or going into other civic places to give talks about just reproductive rights and really like history. Like, this is what was in the past, and we don't want this to happen in the future. But I think since then, and Sarah, chime in whenever, but GER's made some huge evolutionary steps since 2017 when I started. Because when we first started, like I said, everyone was talking about pro choice and abortion. And now we've kind of evolved into where we are a pro abortion culture change organization. And we work through the lens of reproductive justice, and we're lifting up voices and statuses of grandmothers and elders as sources of truth and safety to those accessing accurate information and shame-free care when facing pregnancy and other repro decisions. I think what we really came to understand was that although pro-choice is where we came from and what was important then, we really need to be pro-abortion because that's about access. It's access, access, access. Because to me and to all of us, I think, what good is choice if you can't access what you need? And that to me was what was really important. Abortion is healthcare. And if you can't access your healthcare, you don't have that choice of what you do with it. And I think the other thing that we've really evolved into is our work as intergenerational work. When I first came to GER, it was more like these elder women telling stories, and that's what we were going to do. And we were going to tell you what it was like. We all know what it was like. And now people, since Dobbs, really know what it's becoming like. And what we have found is that intergenerationally, we bring the best of all those worlds. We can talk about and use our power of pre-Roe stories and what things were like before. And then we connect those dots to what's happening now and what could happen in the future. And we work intergenerationally. I mean, our grassroots organizer is someone who could be my daughter. That's that age difference. So we do our stories, but we also are on the front lines of anti-abortion centers and lifting up the truth about those and bringing public awareness to both things and connecting the dots. So I met GER in 2017 and I felt like I met my people and I am not going back. Sarah came along a little later,
Well, yeah, and then I found Gurr on Facebook, and to backtrack a little bit, that's my involvement with reproductive health care and access was something that I was very intentional about when I retired in 2012. And so I got involved and showed up and signed up for everything that I could get my hands on here in Arkansas. And I'm on Facebook and I found Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights. And I thought, dang, that is so fun. And I looked at the pictures and thought, gosh, if I lived in Maine, I would be all over this. It would be so wonderful. And so I just kept following them. And one of the first things that I did to make contact was they were selling these snow hats that said "Grr" on the front. And I was like, I have to have one of those hats. So I ordered a hat, and I have a photograph of myself in front of the Arkansas State Capitol wearing my Grr hat. And I think that was in 2018, maybe. And then I wore it to this rally in 2019. And people would look at me and they were like, what is that? And I'd say, well, it's an organization called Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights. Well, story moving on, I did follow them. And when the organization offered storytelling training for people who had had pre-Roe abortions, I was like, I can do that. And so I signed on with the storytelling project and got to know some of the staff and the other individuals who were doing storytelling in different forms. And after I finished doing that, I would get calls from our organizer and also from the executive director that they had had someone call them and say, we need a storyteller. Well, after Dobbs, it was like everybody needed a storyteller and they wanted to hear stories. And so I have done a number of interviews that GER staff had set me up with. And I don't know, at some point I got an email and they asked me if I would consider joining their board. And that was in, I think, April of 2023, because they realized that I brought a perspective from a very, very red state where we had total abortion ban. We had one of those trigger laws was on the books. And so immediately after Dobbs happened, our people in the state capitol gleefully signed this total abortion ban. And so they invited me to join the board. And I thought, this is a great fit for me because I get to play with the girls, because even though I don't live in Maine, I can be part of this. And so I was so excited to be invited, and I've learned so much. And I think that branching out and trying to raise awareness about the organization throughout the United States is a place where I can play a part.
We would have hugged you if you had lived in Maine. So we thought being on the board was next best thing because we couldn't put our arms around Sarah. So
You get a virtual hug every day.
and virtual hugs.
I am so curious. So GER starts in Maine, but obviously there must be grandmothers across the United States that are finding this project that it's resonating with them. But I'm curious about you both personally. It's a scary thing to admit that this is something that you're passionate about and this is something that you have experienced. Where are you getting your motivation, your bravery? What is it? I mean, in this landscape, in this country, in your state, Sarah, but even women that don't live in red states, it still comes with so much shame. Like, where does this come from, you both personally?
Well, for me, it was the fact that in 1971, in the summer of 1971, I became pregnant. And of course, there was no abortion care in Arkansas in 1971. There wasn't much abortion care anywhere, but it was legal in New York. And so my parents arranged for my mom and me to go to New York City in the summer of 1971, and I had a hospital abortion. And then I remembered I was a sophomore in college when Roe was signed into law. And I remember thinking then at that time, I think I was probably 19 or 20, I was like, if this ever is taken away, I will go and chain myself to the Supreme Court steps. And at the time, it was like along my life, I've been involved. But as a school librarian, you can't really be real vocal about your beliefs. So when I retired in 2012, I was very intentional about getting involved in this work because they were starting to chip away with trap laws in the legislature. And I thought, this is something that I can do, I feel strongly about. And so I got involved and found opportunities to get involved. And once you're a certain age, and in the beginning, I was afraid for people to know that I was doing this work, and it was hard to say the word abortion out loud. Well, once you get going, you just keep going. And so now it's like if somebody has a problem with my position, then I'm sorry. Basically, that's it. And so it's like I show up, and that's what's going to be written on my tombstone. She showed up. And so I was very intentional about the work. And I felt like everything that I did since I retired before I came to GER was preparing me to be and do what I'm doing now on maybe a larger scale. And it's so exciting because I feel like I'm doing something purposeful in my retirement years and that I'm still learning so much. And I'll do it because somebody's got to speak up. And now there are young women in Arkansas who have to travel again, like I did in 1971. And it's come full circle. And by God, if I can do anything to restore the access and for those young women who are in a spot that they don't know how to help themselves and they don't know
Yeah.
what to do, then that's my job. And
Yeah.
so that's what I do in Arkansas. And now I'm with GER, and hopefully I can branch out to other audiences and other resources to make it happen.
Wow. The thing that is so stressful for me post Dobbs is I had an ectopic pregnancy, which you have to terminate, like it's a viable pregnancy. And under some of the legislation, that pregnancy, well, actually, it's legally an abortion when you terminate an ectopic pregnancy. And under some of this legislation, which is asking people to register and be recognized for this, not that any termination or any choice is wrong, but it's not like I had a choice. I had to stop an unviable pregnancy. And so it's incredibly distressing and so important that people understand the larger scope of what people are navigating.
Yeah, and I think something that Sarah said is really important that GER does and that I feel is really important is that we try to give voice to people who otherwise might not have had voice. We try to teach people that there is no shame or stigma attached to the choices that you make. And at the same time, helping grandmothers and elders feel relevant and know that we're relevant and we haven't lost that voice. I mean, we're not in the same place, and it's really important for people to understand how to sometimes let go of our former selves and move over so that we can join with others in this movement. And at the same time, acknowledge that we are still relevant as elder women. And I think That's the niche that Gura has in this movement, is that it's important for us as elders and grandmothers and aunties and whoever we are to know that we still are important and have that same kind of voice and that relevancy that Sarah was talking about. I worked at an abortion clinic in the very late 1970s in New Orleans, and then we moved to Maine. And my whole life, I'd known that abortion was important. And I didn't feel it in my gut until I found out I was pregnant with our first son. And the doctor is like, "You're pregnant." And I'm like, "Ah," I'm so excited. And then I went, "Oh my God, now I understand why abortions are so important, because it's so overwhelming." And my husband and I were able to make the choice that we wanted to make. And we lived in Maine too, so whatever our choices were, we were going to be okay. What really got me though is that by 2017, the choices or the accessibility of abortions were less than what they were in New Orleans in 1979. I was like blown away. And I had answered an ad from Maine Family Planning that said, "We're looking for abortion stories." And my story was that I'd worked in a clinic. And I thought that was, they really weren't looking for that kind of story. They were looking for people who had had abortions. And that connected me, though, back into that movement, which I had stepped aside from because we were raising our three kids. I worked in social work, I was a children's case manager, and still seeing these things. But then once I retired, it was like, yeah, that was a passion that always had burned. And I was going to address that passion. And Greer has made my voice and my passion come together, which I think is really important. And Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, we help a lot of older women find their voice, voices that were silent for so long,
Oh, yeah.
made to feel bad. We're like, no, you shout out what you need to shout out. And here we are, and we are going to shout out. So, yeah, I agree with you about the relevancy.
When people see and talk to me, and I will say, "Oh, well, yeah, I had an abortion pre-Roe," that they will say to me, "I've never told anyone else this, but," and then they launch. And so it's that stigma attached to talking about it, and the fact that we were all just pretty much coached to, like, don't tell anybody, it's bad. And I can tell people it's not bad. And it's like, yes, your story is important. But they will confide in me when they'll say, I've never told anyone this. And so it gives people an opening to get something out there that they've been dragging around for a long time. And sometimes you just need to talk about your experiences, and that's an experience.
I think even now, we give people who are having abortions now that place to tell and share that story without shame and stigma. I remember being at one of the local colleges and we gave our talk and everything. And one of the students came up. Actually, she didn't come up privately. She told the group, she said, "I had an abortion 2 days ago and I have not been able to talk about it at all." So even today, everything out there, there is still shame.
In a state that isn't under attack.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's because it's always been talked about in hushed voices. And I think by working with younger generations and older generations together, we create a really strong bond with each other so that we have that strength to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I know there's nothing good about the Dobbs decision, though now we say abortion all the time and
Yeah.
we say it loudly. You hear it on the news, we talk about it. There is nothing good. And yet we still now can talk about abortions as if it's like it should be normal health care.
Yeah. Abortion is healthcare. You know, the idea to use the word grandmother, even though clearly some of your women are not grandmothers, speaks to something that we talk about a lot at the Grandmother Collective, which is that older women have a different role in the world to play. And Elayne, for you to all to go to college students who are grandchildren age, right? They would be your grandchildren, not your children, is to do that sort of skip generation thing and to bond across grandchild to grandmother and to play a role as community grandmothers. I wonder if you have some sort of reflection on how you've transitioned into a grandmother or a public grandmother or a grand aunt role, and if you can reflect on what you feel that uniqueness is.
So for me, I think about aging a lot now. I guess I'm at that stage of my life where you think about it a lot more than when you were my younger self. But I think working intergenerationally, and I sometimes forget about where I am on that continuum of life, and that's important. But I feel like with GER and being that public face out there and stuff, what I'm learning every day from this and from working here is that though I have this passion that's burning about it, and I'm going to get out there and talk about it anytime, I surely don't have all the answers. And it's important to understand for me to know how to let go of that place as a leader and the person who has the answers to maybe more like a mentor or a contributor and still be integral and important for today. That's a change because you realize we had our chance, we had that moment, and now we're moving on. And yet we still have that energy and the passion that's burning. So we don't want to pull and lead someone. I think it's more important to join in, see what's happening new, because there's stuff happening in this movement new every day, pro and con, and learn. And then add our lived experiences to add into that conversation. And it's just so wicked cool to work with people who could be my children and my grandchildren. And working with my children and my grandchildren, it's an honor and it's humbling. It's very humbling because though we're told to believe as you get older, you get wiser and this and that, there's so much that we need to keep learning, that I keep learning in this to stay relevant to this particular movement and to many other movements as well. I don't have all the answers. And learning that is a huge step in being able to continue.
Yeah. Elayne, I'll say I think that there's leadership even in that modeling of taking a step, right? It's just a different kind of leadership. That boy is really something that I wish more people knew how to do, to say, I can let others lead. And that's leadership in and of itself. Sarah?
One of the things that I feel very strongly about, and that has come with the work that I've intentionally been doing since I retired, is getting involved in other organizations, because I realized early on that politics played a huge role in access and policy about dealing with abortion access. And so I've been involved with other organizations like League of Women Voters and our local Democratic women's group. And there are women of all different ages. And I enjoy in any way that I can provide some type of encouragement or mentoring for these younger women. And just by me being vocal, and it's like, find your voice, speak up, don't hold back. You're smart, you're capable. I feel like that doing this in some way is mentoring the younger people that I know and how much I enjoy working with them. We recently had a petition initiative in Arkansas to try to get abortion on the ballot for this year, and it exceeded our expectations as far as success, although we didn't make it on the ballot. But some of the organizers that I was working with were two former students that I had known in middle school that had been students of mine when I was their middle school librarian. And they were running this organizing in our region of the state. And I was just so proud. And they consulted me and I worked with them. And I was like, these are the kids that I knew in seventh grade. And now they're jumping in and they're doing so much good work. And so just being around young people inspires me. And I learned so much from them. And so I'm not one of those terrible dumb boomers, I hope. I mean, that's my goal is to admit that I'm a boomer and try to do better.
I think we need to uplift. We've been doing this for a very long time, Sarah, and it's because we always, I'm guessing for you as well as for me, because we had hope about the future. And that hope can be contagious. And that's what I feel we need to keep reminding people, that there is a hope for our future, because that's why we're here. And I think working with younger people, you find some extra energy, because there are days when my energy is probably not as high as their energy, but vice versa too. And it's like, how do you keep going on? And I'm like, because I am not going to lose this battle after all these years. And we're going to get through this and we're going to keep moving. And it's just the more I learn, sometimes, especially about the antis, and I do a lot of work with the anti abortion centers, I get so agitated, and that agitation helps me continue that energy to be active. So, part of the thing we try to do is like agitate to activate. Younger people, I think, help us bring that to the movement and just learn what's so necessary on the ground now, because what's necessary now was not necessarily what was necessary back when we were younger and living our lives then, though there's a lot similar. But you can only do it together, and we can't separate generations. We have to find that common thread between us all and then move forward with it. So.
Yeah, it turns out that history repeats itself. If we pretend that one generation replaces the next and that there's no continuity, we kind of shoot ourselves
Yes.
in the foot. Well, I could talk to you both for ages and ages, but I thought maybe you could just share one final thought of what should listeners or people who are listening to this think differently about when it comes to this battle that you're in.
What I'm really hoping is that if we all stop and breathe for a minute, that we're all going to find that we have some things in common with each other. And that once we can find some of that common ground, we can continue. We don't have to agree with each other. And even if all we have in common is that we agree that we don't agree, we know that we can come back to the table and have a conversation and continue the conversation. We can also understand that being different is okay, and different and respectful, but different adds a little bit of flavor to life that we need to have. And I try to use this approach, especially when I'm talking with people who don't agree with me at all about abortion, and find that common ground so that I keep that communication open. And I'm hoping that if we can all do that and reflect on our lives, from our past lives, our present lives, and maybe in our future, that we can all say that we were really authentic with our relationships with other people and genuine. And that for me, I think Sarah said something about she wants to have people say on her tomb that she gave it her all or something like that. I want people to be able to say that I walked my talk and that I'm being genuine and authentic. And I think we all need to find that in each other, because we're really so much more alike than we are different. And there's too much gobbledygook that it's really simple, and just pile on way too much stuff to make us different in a bad way. And that's why I'm hopeful, because I think we can continue conversations.
As far as what listeners should take away from this is that never assume that when you meet people either younger or older than you, that they don't have something to bring to a conversation. Be intentional about creating and developing relationships with all different kinds of people, because it definitely gets you out of your rut of thinking this is the way it should be. And both of my parents, my dad was very adamant about, we just don't do that. Our family doesn't do that. I mean, it's like they're not our kind of people. And I was raised like that. And I have learned so much about how I wish I could share with him that it's like they're different, but they're okay because it's none of my business. And so just to be intentional about getting to know what's going on with other people and to listen. It doesn't matter if you're Gen X or Z or LMNOP or whatever. We all have something valuable, and listening to each other and developing relationships with people of different generations will enhance and enrich your lives.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. This is a heavy topic, but I appreciated your candor and your joy and your energy and your commitment to making the world better, which is what I constantly see with the grandmothers that we connect with. So I really appreciate you showing up for us today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for just sharing what Grandmothers for Reproductive Rights is all about. We are looking to include more people, and so awareness is very important to our organization. And we appreciate that you have given us an opportunity to hopefully create some more awareness.